The morning sun had barely crept over the jagged peaks of the Superstition Mountains when Ellen Ward heard the water. It wasn't the gentle trickle she'd grown accustomed to during her 3 months in this God-forsaken corner of Arizona territory. This was different, a low, grinding rumble that made the sparse mesquite trees shudder and sent the desert quail scattering from their roosts. She stood at the edge of what had been, just yesterday, a dry riverbed she could cross in 20 paces. Now the salt river ran brown and angry, carrying uprooted Palo Verde trees and the debris of distant storms. The late spring rains in the high country had finally reached the valley, and with them, her last chance of reaching Fort McDowell before the supply wagons left for New Mexico. Ellen adjusted the canvas sack on her shoulder, everything she owned in this world, and studied the churning water. 26 years old, widowed for 8 months, and down to her last $3. The teaching position in Las Cruces wouldn't wait forever. Neither would her sister, who'd written twice already, wondering why Ellen hadn't arrived. She knew why. Pride, mostly, and grief that clung to her like the dust of this territory. But standing here watching the floodwater rise, she felt something else stirring beneath the numbness. A flicker of the woman she'd been before James died. Before the fever took their baby girl 3 days after birth. Before she'd learned what it meant to be truly alone. The ford was impassable. She'd have to go upstream, find a narrower crossing. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the heat. By noon, the temperature would reach 90. By evening, if she hadn't found shelter or water, she'd be another cautionary tale the frontier women whispered about while beating laundry against river rocks. Ellen began walking north along the bank, her boots James's boots, taken from his trunk and stuffed with cloth to fit slipping on the loose stones. The river had cut deep here, creating walls of red earth that crumbled at a touch. Somewhere across that water lay the road to the fort, to civilization, to a life that might make sense again. 2 hours passed. The river narrowed but grew faster, funneled between canyon walls. Ellen's dress, already patched and repatched, caught on thorns and sharp rocks. Her hands, once soft enough to teach penmanship to the banker's children back in Tucson, were now cut and bleeding. She barely noticed. What she did notice were the tracks horses, at least 6, moving along the opposite bank. Fresh tracks, no more than a few hours old, the leather-wrapped handle of James's Colt Navy revolver pressed against her ribs where she'd hidden it beneath her corset. 6 shots. She'd only fired it twice, both times at rattlesnakes. The weight of it reminded her how little 6 shots meant out here. The canyon opened slightly, revealing what might have been a crossing in drier times. The water looked shallower, broken by a line of boulders. Ellen studied the gaps between them, measuring distances, calculating whether her legs were long enough, her balance sure enough. She thought of her sister's letter. "The school has a small house attached. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe. The children here need someone patient, someone who's known loss but hasn't let it make them bitter." Ellen laughed, a short, harsh sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Not bitter. She'd been teaching bitterness to swallow itself for months now, washing it down with warm water and stale bread. Smiling at the ranchers' wives who whispered about the young widow who'd lost her mind with grief. She stepped onto the first boulder. The river pulled at her skirts immediately, the current stronger than it looked. Second boulder, third. Halfway across, the water rose to her knees. She could see the opposite bank clearly now, a shelf of sandstone, some hardy creosote bushes, salvation in the form of solid ground. The fourth boulder shifted under her weight. For a moment, Ellen felt herself suspended between balance and disaster, her arms windmilling, the canvas sack pulling her backward. Then the rock rolled completely, and she plunged into the flood. The water was shockingly cold despite the desert heat. It filled her mouth, her nose turned the world into a brown, churning chaos, her skirts tangled around her legs like ropes. The current slammed her against a submerged log, driving the air from her lungs. She clawed at the water, at nothing, her fingers finding only the indifferent flow. This is how it ends, she thought with surprising clarity. Not from fever or childbirth or a broken heart, but from simple miscalculation. The river would take her body miles downstream, leave it caught in some tangle of driftwood for the coyotes to find. Her sister would wait and wonder. The teaching position would go to someone else, someone who knew better than to chance a flooded river alone. Then, through the water filling her eyes, she saw him. He seemed to materialize from the canyon wall itself, a figure dropping from an invisible ledge. His movement fluid as the water, but with purpose the river lacked. Dark hair streamed behind him as he dove. And for a wild moment, Ellen thought she was already dead, that this was some angel or demon come to collect what remained of her soul. Strong hands caught her arms, pulled her up. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, coughing up brown water. Those same hands guided her to a half-submerged cottonwood trunk, helped her grab hold. "Breathe," a voice said in accented English. "Slowly. The water has not won yet." Ellen's vision cleared enough to see her rescuer, an Apache warrior, though not dressed for war. His calico shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a recent scar. Water ran from his black hair down a face that might have been carved from the canyon walls themselves, all angles and weathered strength. Except for the eyes. The eyes were kind. "Can you hold on?" he asked. Ellen nodded, not trusting her voice. He disappeared beneath the water, and for a moment she panicked, thinking he'd abandoned her. Then she felt his hands on her tangled skirts, a knife sawing through the heavy fabric. The weight fell away, and suddenly she could move her legs again. He surfaced beside her. "We go together. Use your legs. Trust me." There was no choice but to trust. Ellen kicked as he guided them toward the bank, using the current rather than fighting it. His strength seemed endless, his knowledge of the river's moods intuitive. When they finally reached shallow water, he half carried her to a sheltered overhang in the canyon wall. Ellen collapsed on the sandy ground, shaking, not just from cold or exhaustion, but from the simple shock of being alive. She looked up at the man who'd saved her tall, perhaps 30 years old, with the kind of stillness that came from living as both hunter and hunted. "Thank you," she managed. He was studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he reached for something tucked into his belt, her canvas sack, somehow retrieved from the river. "The water took your dress, but not your words," he said, gesturing to the waterlogged books and papers visible through the canvas. His English was careful, precise, as if each word had been weighed before speaking. "You are the teacher woman, the one who leaves paper and pencil for the children near Bitter Creek." Ellen's breath caught. For months, she'd been secretly leaving small bundles near the Apache camp's paper, pencils, sometimes a simple primer. She'd told herself it was Christian charity, but the truth was simpler. She missed teaching, missed the light in a child's eyes when the marks on paper suddenly became words, became thoughts, became power. "How did you—" "My sister's son. He draws horses now. Writes his name." The warrior's face softened almost imperceptibly. "The soldiers at the fort would hang you for such kindness. The soldiers at the fort have their own sins to account for." He smiled then, just slightly. "You speak like someone who has seen their justice." Thunder rumbled somewhere upstream. They both looked up at the sky, which had been clear an hour ago, but now showed dark clouds building over the mountains. "More rain coming," he said. "Flash flood. This place will not be safe." As if to emphasize his words, the river's rumble grew louder. Small rocks began falling from the canyon walls as the water rose. "I know a place," he continued. "High ground. But—" he paused, seeming to weigh his words again. "You would have to trust an Apache." Ellen almost laughed. An hour ago, she'd been prepared to die rather than deviate from her planned route to the fort. Now, soaked and half-dressed, alive only because of this stranger's intervention, the old rules seemed absurd. "I trust the man who pulled me from the river," she said, "Apache or otherwise." He nodded and helped her to her feet. That's when they both heard it. Horses moving fast along the rim above. The warrior's entire demeanor changed, shifting from careful kindness to sharp alertness. He pressed himself against the canyon wall, pulling Ellen with him into the shadows of the overhang. "How many horses did you hear earlier?" he asked quietly. 6, maybe 7, on the opposite bank. His jaw tightened. "Broderick's men, hunting?" Ellen knew the name. Silas Broderick, railroad contractor, land speculator, and, by all accounts, a man who solved problems with gold when possible and lead when necessary. She'd heard whispers that he'd been hiring men to clear out the Apache problem along his proposed rail routes. Hunting what? The warrior looked at her with those kind eyes that held too much history. "Today me, tomorrow, anyone who stands between him and the water rights." He paused. "You chose a dangerous day to cross the river. Teach your woman." The horses were moving again, working their way down toward the water. Ellen could hear voices now, too faint to make out words but clear in intent. These were men on a trail, and they wouldn't give up easily. "We need to move," the warrior said. He glanced at her ruined dress, now ending raggedly at her knees, and her boots, too large. Clearly a man's. Without a word, he pulled off his own shirt and handed it to her. "For the thorns," he said simply. Ellen took it, trying not to stare at the scars that mapped his chest and arms, some old, some recent, all speaking of a life lived on the knife's edge of survival. The shirt smelled of sage and wood smoke and something else, freedom, perhaps, or defiance. As she pulled it on over her torn bodice, he moved to the edge of the overhang, reading the canyon like other men might read a book. "This way," he said finally. "Stay close. Step where I step." They began to climb, using handholds that seemed invisible until he showed her where to place her fingers. The voices were getting closer. Ellen could make out words now. "Tracks end at the water. Could have crossed before the flood. Could have drowned. More like check downstream. Crow says he winged him yesterday. If he's bleeding." The warrior wounded, Ellen realized. Remembering the fresh scar climbed steadily upward. She followed, her world shrinking to the next handhold, the next steady place for her boot. The coat pressed against her ribs, a reminder of the violence that might be coming. They reached a narrow ledge just as the first riders appeared below. Ellen pressed herself flat against the rock face, barely breathing. She could see them clearly, hard men with harder faces, bristling with weapons. One of them, lean and dark, like a crow himself, dismounted to examine the ground where she and the warrior had climbed out of the river. "2 people," Crow called up. "One of them small. Woman or child, maybe." Another rider, older, with the look of a man who enjoyed his cruelties, spat tobacco juice into the rising water. "The Apache's got himself a hostage. Then, Mr. Broderick will pay extra for that kind of information." Ellen felt the warrior tense beside her. His hand moved slowly to the knife at his belt. She touched his arm, shook her head slightly. 6 men, all armed. Even if they managed to kill 1 or 2, the others would cut them down. Crow was still studying the tracks. "Don't think so," he said finally. "These prints, she was ahead of him? Crossing alone. Then where is she? River took her, most likely." Crow stood, scanning the canyon walls. For a heart-stopping moment, his gaze seemed to linger on their ledge. Then he turned away. "Or the Apache took her. Either way, she's not our problem. We're hunting him, not collecting strays." The older rider laughed unpleasantly. "Might be we could make her our problem. Been a while since we had any entertainment at camp. Mr. Broderick's paying us to clear out Apaches, not chase petticoats," Crow said coldly. "Save your appetites for town." He mounted his horse again. "Storm's coming. We'll check the crossing at Devil's Gate before the flood hits." They rode off upstream, their voices fading into the growing thunder. Ellen and the warrior remained frozen for long minutes after, waiting to be sure they were truly gone. Finally, he spoke. You could have called out. They would have helped you. Would they? He studied her face. You know the answer. Yes, she did. She'd seen what men like that considered help when it came to women alone on the frontier. Death in the river seemed cleaner somehow. Come, he said. The storm will cover our tracks, but we need shelter. They climbed higher, the ledge widening into a proper trail that wound up through layers of sandstone and volcanic rock. The first fat raindrops began to fall, cold and shocking after the morning's heat. Within minutes, it was a downpour. The warrior led her to a deep overhang, almost a cave, sheltered by a massive slab of rock. Ancient soot on the ceiling suggested others had used this shelter across the centuries. He gathered dead wood from the protected corners, producing fire with the efficiency that spoke of long practice. As the flames caught, Ellen finally got a good look at her rescuer. His face was younger than she'd first thought, but his eyes were ancient. Water ran from his hair, and she could see now that the scar on his shoulder was actually a fresh wound, partially healed but torn open again by his dive into the river. You're hurt, she said. He glanced at the wound dismissively. It will heal. Not if it festers. Ellen dug into her salvaged sack, pulling out what had survived the water. Her few clothes were soaked, the books ruined, but wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom were the things that mattered: James's pistol, still dry, a small sewing kit, and a bottle of carbolic acid she'd bought from a traveling medicine man. Let me see. He hesitated, then moved closer to the fire. The wound was a graze, probably from a rifle shot, already showing signs of infection at the edges. This will hurt, Ellen warned, uncorking the bottle. Pain is an old friend. She cleaned the wound as gently as she could, but he never flinched, never made a sound. When she was done, she tore a strip from her ruined petticoat to bind it. Now we are even, he said. A life for a life. I hardly think. You think wrong. His voice was serious. The papers you left for the children. My sister's boy was falling into darkness, anger, hatred. The words you left, the power to make marks that speak you gave him a different path. Ellen felt tears prick her eyes. In all the months since James and the baby died, no one had suggested that anything she did mattered. What's your name? He was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire. The name my mother gave me would be hard for your tongue. The name the white school tried to beat into me. I left buried there. But my sister's children call me Taklishta. It means he who waits for daylight. I'm Ellen Ward. I know. At her surprised look, he almost smiled. The children talk. They wonder about the sad white woman who gives gifts but asks nothing back. Sad white woman. Is that what she'd become? Ellen pulled his shirt closer around her shoulders, shivering despite the fire. Why were those men hunting you? Taklishta fed another stick to the flames. Broderick wants the water, all of it, the sacred springs, the seep wells, the rights to dam the rivers. My people are in the way. But there are laws. Your laws, written by men who have never carried water 20 miles for their children, enforced by men who take gold from other men like Broderick. He shrugged. We will fight anyway. The rain hammered harder outside their shelter, turning the world into a gray curtain. Ellen watched the water cascade off the rocks, creating temporary waterfalls that would vanish with the sun. I was going to Fort McDowell, she said. Then New Mexico. My sister has arranged a teaching position. Running away? The question stung because it was true. Starting over. The same thing, sometimes. He wasn't judging, just observing. But the river had other plans. The river nearly killed me. The river brought us together. Now Broderick's men hunt us both. He looked at her directly. They saw 2 sets of tracks. By now, Crow has figured out what happened. A white woman who helps Apaches. You are as much an enemy to them as I am. Ellen felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. He was right. Even if she made it to the fort, questions would be asked. Why was she at that crossing? Who pulled her from the river? Why didn't she call out to Broderick's men? What do I do? Tonight rest. Dry your clothes. Eat. He pulled something from a pouch at his belt. Dried meat and some kind of flatbread. Tomorrow, you choose. I can show you a way to the fort where Broderick's men won't find you. Or there is another path. Through the Blue Moon Pass. It goes to the old Spanish settlements, then to New Mexico. Longer, harder, but no one watches it. No one asks questions. Ellen took the offered food, chewing slowly. It tasted of smoke and salt and survival. Why would you help me? Your people have every reason to hate mine. Teclishta was quiet for a long time, watching the rain. Hate is heavy to carry through the desert, he said finally. And you are not your people. You are Ellen Ward, who gives books to Apache children. That makes you uncommon. They sat in companionable silence, watching the storm spend itself against the ancient rocks. Ellen found herself studying his profile in the firelight. The way stillness seemed to flow from him like water from stone. She'd been around dangerous men, the frontier was full of them, but this was different. His danger was precise, controlled, pointed outward at threats rather than radiating in all directions. Tell me about the children, she said, the ones who found the books. For the first time since she'd met him, Teclishta's face truly softened. My sister has two boys, one girl, the girl, Ayana. She draws everything now. Birds, horses, the mountains. She says when she learns all the words, she will write the stories our grandmother tells. And the boys, they fight over the pencils. He actually smiled. But they learn. Even old Nalnish, who said the white man's marks were witch signs, now asks his grandson to read the labels at the trading post. Ellen smiled too, imagining it. I was a teacher in Tucson. Before, she swallowed, before my husband died. It was the only thing that made sense to me, watching understanding dawn in a child's eyes. You have no children. The question was asked simply, without the prying undertone she'd grown used to from frontier women. We had a daughter. She lived 3 days. I am sorry. 2 words. But they held more genuine sympathy than all the flowery condolences she'd received in Tucson. Maybe because they came from someone who understood loss. My wife died of the spotted sickness, he said. Our son with her, 2 winters ago. Ellen looked at him. This man who had saved her life, who carried his own grief like she carried hers quietly, constantly, worked into the fabric of breathing. I'm sorry too. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the rain was easing, though water still poured from the rocks in a dozen temporary streams. Your husband? Teclishta asked. He was a good man. Ellen considered the question. He was kind, steady. He came west for his health lung weakness and thought the dry air would cure him. It didn't. She paused. We had a quiet life together, peaceful, if not passionate. I think we could have been happy, given time. Time is the one thing the desert doesn't give. No, Ellen agreed. It doesn't. She thought of James, coughing blood into his handkerchief, trying to hide it from her. Of the baby, so small, so perfect, fighting for each tiny breath until she couldn't fight anymore. Of herself, these past months, going through motions of living while feeling dead inside. Until today, until the river tried to take her and this stranger pulled her back. Are you cold? Teclishta asked. Ellen realized she was shivering. A little. He moved around the fire, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Sleep, he said. I will keep watch. Those men will not travel in this storm, and this place has only one approach: rest. Ellen knew she should stay alert, should maintain the proper distance that society demanded. But society was far away, and exhaustion pulled at her like the river's current. She lay down near the fire, using her ruined dress as a pillow. Taklishta. Yes, thank you for saving me, for everything. Thank the river, he said. It brought us together for a reason. As sleep took her, Ellen wondered what that reason might be. The last thing she saw was him silhouetted against the storm, standing guard between her and all the dangers of the night. Tomorrow, she would have to choose the fort and safety and questions, or the unknown path through Blue Moon Pass. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt something other than grief and emptiness. She felt alive. Ellen woke to the sound of grinding stone. For a moment, she couldn't place herself the cave, the cold fire, the unfamiliar shirt that smelled of sage. Then memory flooded back the river, the rescue, the Apache warrior who'd pulled her from certain death. Taklishta sat near the cave entrance, using a round stone to grind something in a shallow depression in the rock. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Morning light caught the water droplets on spider webs, turning them into strings of diamonds. You slept deeply, he said without turning. That is good. The body heals better when the mind rests. Ellen sat up, immediately aware of her aching muscles and the dozen cuts and bruises she'd collected yesterday. Her dress had dried into a stiff, shortened ruin. She was grateful for his shirt, which at least preserved some modesty. What are you making? Pine pitch and charcoal, for wounds. He gestured to his shoulder. Yours need tending too. Ellen looked at her hands scraped raw from the rocks, one deep cut across her palm still seeping. She hadn't even noticed yesterday. Come, he said, I'll show you. She moved to sit beside him, watching as he mixed the dark powder with thick pine resin, adding a few drops of water from a gourd. His movements were precise, practiced. My grandmother taught me this, he said, before the soldiers came, before the schools. His voice carried no bitterness, just fact. She knew every plant in these mountains, every root, every healing bark, said the land itself was medicine, if you knew how to listen. My grandmother was a midwife, Ellen offered. Back in Ohio, she had books full of receipts remedies. She called them willow bark for fever, moldy bread for wounds. Moldy bread. It prevented infection. Somehow. She didn't know why, just that it worked. Ellen smiled at the memory. My mother thought it was backward superstition. She wanted everything modern, scientific. Yet here you are, letting an Apache put pine pitch on your wounds. There was gentle humor in his voice. Here I am, Ellen agreed. He took her hand, his touch careful but firm, and began applying the mixture to her cuts. It stung at first, then numbed to a pleasant coolness. You said yesterday that I could go to the fort, Ellen said, but Broderick's men saw our tracks together. They saw tracks, whether together or apart. Who can say the flood confused many things? He moved to her other hand. But you are right to be cautious. Broderick has eyes everywhere. Men who would sell their neighbors for silver. What about the other path Blue Moon passes? Taklishta finished with her hands and sat back. 5 days walking. If you know the way, there is water, but you must know where. Food, but you must know what is safe. The Mexican settlements on the other side ask no questions. But the journey is dangerous. Everything here is dangerous. The question is which danger you choose. Ellen flexed her newly bandaged hands. The pine pitch had dried to a protective coating, pulling her skin tight but keeping the wounds closed. Would you, that is, could you show me the way? He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the brightening canyon. My people need me. There are supplies coming. Medicine for the children. I must meet the traders. Guide them past Broderick's watchers. Of course, I didn't mean to. But, he turned to her. The trail to Blue Moon Pass runs near where I must go. For 3 days. We could travel together. After that, the path is clear. Even a white woman could follow it. Ellen bristled. This white woman survived 8 months alone in Arizona territory. Survived, yes, but not lived. He stood, moving to gather their few belongings. There is a difference. The truth of it stung more than the pine pitch on her wounds. She had been surviving, nothing more, going through motions, eating because her body demanded it, sleeping because exhaustion gave her no choice. But living that had died with James and their daughter. "We should go," Taklishta said. "The morning is cool, good for walking." They left the cave as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Ellen quickly learned that following an Apache through this terrain required every ounce of concentration she possessed. He moved like water finding its path downhill, always choosing the way that left the least trace. "Step on the rock, not beside it," he instructed. "The stone holds no memory. Earth remembers everything." They descended into a narrow canyon different from yesterday's violent watercourse. This one whispered with secret springs and seeps, its walls carved with spiral petroglyphs that looked impossibly ancient. "What do they mean?" Ellen asked, tracing one with her finger. "Stories, warnings, maps." Taklishta studied them briefly. "This one says water can be found where the white stone meets red. 2 days' walk toward the setting sun. This one tells of a battle, long ago, when the people with painted shields came from the south. And this," she pointed to a figure that seemed to be reaching toward a spiral. "The journey inward, or outward, depending on how you see it." He moved on without elaborating. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. They rested in the shade of a massive boulder, sharing the last of his dried meat and the water from his gourd. "Tell me about the school," Ellen said. "The one they sent you to." His face closed slightly. "Why?" "Because I was a teacher. I thought I was helping. Now, I want to understand what I was really part of." Taklishta broke a twig between his fingers, considering. "I was 12 when they took me, old enough to remember everything, too young to stop them. They cut our hair first, said it was for cleanliness. But we knew better. Hair holds memory, holds connection to ancestors. Without it, we were naked in ways that had nothing to do with clothes." Ellen thought of the Apache children she'd seen from a distance, their long hair gleaming in the sun. The boys at the fort school all had short, military cuts. They beat us for speaking our language, locked us in dark rooms for practicing our prayers, gave us new names. I was Daniel Greyhawk to them. Daniel because it was biblical. Greyhawk because they needed something to put in their records, and my clan name was too hard for their tongues. "How long were you there?" 3 years. Some never left died of sadness. Mostly, the ones who lived learned to split themselves. One face for the teachers, another for when we were alone. But you can't live split forever. Eventually, you have to choose. You chose to leave. I chose to remain whole. He looked at her directly. That's why your books mattered. You gave our children the tool without trying to take their souls in exchange. They traveled on as the afternoon wore toward evening. Ellen learned to read the land as he did the way certain birds meant water nearby, how the color of soil changed near underground springs, which cacti held moisture in their flesh and which would poison. "Here," he said, cutting a paddle from a prickly pear with his knife. He scraped off the spines expertly and handed it to her. "Chew slowly. It holds water and some sweetness." The taste was strange, but not unpleasant. As they walked, he taught her other things, how to find direction by the growth of barrel cacti, how to read weather and the behavior of ants, how to move quietly enough that the desert didn't announce your presence to every living thing. They climbed a steep switchback as the sun began its descent. At the top, the view opened up miles of canyon country spread out like a map made of red stone and shadow. In the distance, Ellen could see a line of green that might have been the Salt River, and beyond that, the hazy peaks that marked the edge of known territory. "There," Taklishta pointed to a notch between 2 flat-topped mesas. "Blue Moon Pass. When the moon rises full, it sits perfectly in that notch, like a blue eye watching." "It's beautiful," Ellen breathed. "Beautiful and terrible. He agreed. Like most things here. They made camp in a grove of ancient junipers, their twisted trunks telling stories of centuries of wind and drought. Taklishta showed her how to gather the purple berries, food and medicine both, and how to strip the fibrous bark for kindling. As darkness fell and the fire caught, he produced more food from his packed piñon nuts and dried agave hearts, a cake made from mesquite bean flour. "You're prepared for long journeys," Ellen observed. "Always. You never know when the world will shift, when you must run instead of walk." He handed her the mesquite cake. "Eat slowly. It swells with water." They sat in comfortable quiet, watching the stars emerge. Out here, with no town lights for hundreds of miles, the Milky Way sprawled across the sky like spilled flour. "James used to say the stars were God's poetry," Ellen said softly. "That if we could read them right, we'd understand everything." "What do you say?" She considered. "I say they're beautiful and distant and utterly unconcerned with human suffering. Perhaps that is their mercy." Taklishta suggested, "To be unmoved by our pain, or their cruelty." "The stars are neither cruel nor kind. They simply are. We are the ones who need them to mean something." He added a stick to the fire. "Your husband was a believer, then." "Devout. He read scripture every morning, prayed every night, said our daughter's death was God's will, that she was needed in heaven." Ellen heard the bitterness creeping into her voice. "I wanted to scream at him. What could heaven possibly need with a 3-day-old baby? What purpose could that serve?" "What did you do instead?" "Nothing. Smiled, nodded, died a little more each day." She pulled her knees to her chest. "The good widow, that's what they called me in Tucson. So brave, so faithful. They had no idea I was screaming inside." Taklishta was quiet for a long time. Then, "My people believe the dead travel west, following the sun to the spirit land, but first they must pass through a place of mists, where they shed their earth memories like old skin. Only then can they be free." "That sounds peaceful." "For the dead, perhaps. The living must make their own peace." He looked at her across the fire. "Have you—" "No." The word came out flat, final. "I don't even know what peace would look like anymore." "Maybe that is where it starts, with not knowing." A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild chorus. Ellen shivered despite the warmth of the fire. "They won't come close," Taklishta assured her. "Coyote is curious but cautious, like someone else I know." "I'm not cautious. Cautious people don't try to cross flooded rivers alone." "That wasn't courage. That was despair wearing courage's mask." His voice held no judgment. "I know the difference. I wore that mask for many months after my wife died." "What changed?" He smiled slightly. "My sister's youngest asked me to teach him to hunt. Such a simple thing, but when I saw him draw his first bow, steady his first arrow, I remembered life insists on continuing. Whether we participate or not, we can choose to guide it or let it flow past us." "So you chose to guide it?" "I chose to try. Some days are better than others." He pulled something from his pack, a small leather pouch. "Here, for your hands." Ellen opened it to find a salve that smelled of pine and something sweeter. As she applied it to her wounded palms, she asked, "Why Daniel?" "At the school, they named you Daniel. Why keep any part of that?" "To remind myself that I survived it, that they tried to erase me and failed." He shrugged. "And it's useful, sometimes, to have a name white men can pronounce. Makes trading easier." "But it's not who you are." "No, but Taklishta isn't all of who I am either. We are many things, many names, many faces. The trick is not losing yourself in the switching." Ellen thought about that about Mrs. James Ward, the proper teacher's wife she'd been in Tucson, about the broken woman who'd fled into the desert, about whoever she was becoming now, dressed in an Apache's shirt, learning to read the land like a book written in stone and thorn. I don't know who I am anymore. She admitted, good. Certainty is a cage. Better to be like water, finding your shape as you flow. Is that more grandmother wisdom? No, that's mine. Earned the hard way. He lay back, looking up at the stars. Sleep now. Tomorrow will be harder than today. Why? Because tomorrow we reach the trade routes, where my people cross paths with yours, where choices have consequences that echo. Ellen lay down on the other side of the fire, using her salvaged sack as a pillow again. Despite the hard ground and the alien sounds of the desert night, she felt oddly safe. This man who should have been her enemy had become her protector, her teacher, perhaps even her friend. Taklishta. What you said about the children, about the books giving them tools without taking their souls, did you mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. Then maybe, she paused, gathering courage. Maybe I wasn't just surviving after all. Maybe some part of me was still trying to live, even when I didn't know it. Seeds can wait years for the right rain, he said softly. That doesn't mean they're dead, just waiting. Ellen closed her eyes, feeling tears slip free, not the bitter tears of grief this time, but something cleaner, like rain after drought. In the morning, they would continue toward Blue Moon Pass, toward whatever choices waited at the crossing of worlds. But tonight, under stars that neither blessed nor cursed, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. The fire crackled low. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and Ellen Ward, neither the woman she'd been nor the one she'd become, slept without dreams for the first time in 8 months. The third day dawned cold, with frost silvering the juniper needles. Ellen woke to find Taklishta already alert, studying the horizon with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. What is it? Smoke, 3 fires, maybe 4. He pointed to wisps so faint she could barely see them against the lightning sky. Signal fires. Someone wants to be seen. Your people? No. We use mirrors when the sun is up. Single fires at night. This... He frowned. This is meant to draw attention. They broke camp quickly. Ellen now practiced enough to leave few traces of their presence. As they climbed toward the ridge that would take them to Blue Moon Pass, the morning revealed a landscape that seemed torn from the Earth's first day's twisted spires of red rock. Canyons that cut so deep their bottoms remained in shadow even at noon. Stay close today, Taklishta said. The trail narrows ahead. One false step. He didn't finish, but Ellen could see the drops on either side. Hundreds of feet to jumbled rocks below. They were traversing a particularly treacherous section, a ledge no wider than Ellen's shoulders. When they heard the horses, the sound echoed strangely off the canyon walls, making it impossible to tell direction or distance. Taklishta pressed himself against the rock face, motioning Ellen to do the same. They waited, breathing shallow, as the sound grew closer. Then, from around a bend below, a line of riders appeared. Ellen recognized the lead man immediately, Bede Crow Malloy, Broderick's tracker. Behind him rode 5 others, all armed, all scanning the cliffs with predatory focus. The Apache and his white woman came this way. Crow was saying. The old Mexican at Agua Fria saw them 2 days ago, heading north. Could be anywhere by now. One of the riders complained. These canyons got 1,000 hiding places. Not anywhere. Crow corrected. He's hurt, traveling with a woman who doesn't know the land. They'll need water, shelter. They'll follow the old paths. He pulled out a map, studied it. Blue Moon Pass. That's where they're headed. Ellen felt Taklishta tense beside her. His hand moved slowly to his knife. Mr. Broderick wants them alive if possible. Another rider said, especially the woman. Says she might have information about where the Apache camps are hidden. Crow laughed. An ugly sound. Alive is a flexible word out here. Long as they can talk. Doesn't much matter what condition they're in otherwise. The riders continued past, their voices fading. Ellen and Taklishta remained frozen until even the echo of hoofbeats disappeared. Only then did he speak, his voice barely a whisper. "They know our direction. We cannot use the main trail. Is there another way?" "Yes, but—" He looked at her, assessing. "It requires climbing, real climbing, not just walking steep trails." Ellen thought of the sheer rock faces she'd seen, the dizzying heights. "I can do it." Can and will are different words when you're hanging by your fingers, with nothing but air beneath you. "Then I'll have to make them the same word." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or recognition. "Come, we backtrack first, lay false trail, then we climb." They spent the next hour creating deception's footprints leading to dead ends, disturbed brush suggesting passage where none had occurred. Taklishta showed her how to walk backwards in her own footprints, how to use a juniper branch to blur the tracks. "Crow is good," he explained. "But even good trackers see what they expect to see. We give him a story he wants to believe: panicked flight, poor choices." Finally, with the sun high overhead, they reached what Ellen could only describe as a wall. The red sandstone rose vertical, broken by cracks and tiny ledges that might charitably be called handholds. "This?" she asked, her mouth dry. "The needle's eye. My grandfather showed me this route when I was young. Few know it exists." He studied the rock face like a man reading scripture. "Watch where I put my hands, my feet. Test every hold before you trust it. And Ellen," he turned to her, "don't look down." He began to climb, moving with a fluid grace that made it look almost easy. Ellen followed, her heart hammering. The first 20 feet weren't too bad. The holds were clear, the rock solid. But as they climbed higher, the exposure became terrifying. 50 feet up, her hand slipped on a hold made slick by centuries of wind polish. For a heart-stopping moment, she hung by one hand, her feet scrambling for purchase. "Breathe." Taklishta's voice came from above, calm as deep water. "The rock is patient. Be patient with it." Ellen forced herself to stop thrashing, to think. There, a tiny crack to her left. She wedged her fingers in, found stability, continued upward. 100 feet, 200. The world below became abstract, unreal. There was only the rock, the next hold, the rhythm of movement. Her arms burned, her fingers bled where the rough stone tore skin. But she climbed. Near the top, the route traversed sideways along a ledge no wider than her hand. Taklishta had already crossed, was waiting on a broader shelf. "Don't think," he advised. "Just move." Ellen fixed her eyes on him and shuffled sideways, trying not to imagine the void pulling at her back. Halfway across, a piece of the ledge crumbled under her foot. She swayed outward, certain she was falling. Taklishta's hand shot out, caught her wrist, pulled her to safety. They collapsed together on the shelf, breathing hard. "You did well," he said. "I almost died, again." "But you didn't. Again." There was something almost like pride in his voice. Few Apache women would attempt the needle's eye. Fewer would succeed. They rested until their breathing steadied, then continued upward along an easier chimney to the top. The summit revealed a sight that made the climb worthwhile, a hidden valley cupped between peaks, green with spring grass and cottonwoods. "Water," Taklishta explained. "A spring that never fails. We'll rest here. Let Crow waste time searching the lower trails." They descended into the valley, and Ellen felt like she was entering another world. After days in the harsh canyons, the grass felt impossibly soft under her torn boots. The spring bubbled up clear and cold, feeding a pool bordered by maidenhair ferns. "Can I?" She gestured at the pool. "It's safe, sacred to my people, but not forbidden." He turned away. "I'll scout the far end, make sure we're alone." Ellen waited until he was out of sight, then stripped off her ruined dress and his borrowed shirt. The cold water shocked her skin but felt like benediction. washing away days of dust and sweat and fear. She scrubbed her hair, watched the dirt cloud and dissipate. When she emerged, she found Taklishta had built a small fire and laid out food more of his traveling rations, but also fresh greens he'd gathered. Miner's lettuce, he explained. And these, pointing to some roots, taste like nuts when roasted. They ate in companionable silence as afternoon shadows lengthened. Ellen had redressed in her poor clothes, but felt cleaner, more human. "How's your shoulder?" she asked. He rotated it experimentally. "Healing. Your medicine is good." "My grandmother's medicine. I just remembered it." Memory is its own medicine sometimes. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. Ellen watched it, envying its freedom from earthbound concerns. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly. Taklishta was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Her name was Lilui. It means singing hawk in our language. She laughed like water over stones, fought like a wildcat when angry. She could track better than most men, shoot straighter, run longer." His voice softened. "She made me want to be better than I was." "How did you meet?" "At a gathering between bands. I was young, full of anger from the school years. She saw through it to something worth saving. We married against her father's wishes. He wanted her to marry a man with horses, not a half-tamed youth with nothing but rage." "But she chose you." "She chose us. There's a difference. She saw who we could be together." He poked the fire with a stick. 9 years we had, a son who lived 6. Then the sickness came. I'm sorry." "Yes, but sorry doesn't bring them back, doesn't fill the empty lodge. For a long time. I wanted to follow them west. Even tried once, stood at the edge of the Mogollon Rim, ready to step into air." "What stopped you?" "An eagle. It swooped past, so close I felt the wind from its wings. And I thought Lilui loved watching eagles. If I die, who will remember how she shaded her eyes against the sun to track their flight? Who will tell our son's children that he could whistle like every bird in the forest?" He shrugged. "So I climbed down, decided to be a keeper of memories instead of another ghost." Ellen felt tears on her cheeks. "James wanted to name our daughter Faith. I wanted to name her Grace. We compromised on Faith Grace Ward. 3 days, that's all she had. But I remember," her voice broke, "I remember how she gripped my finger, how her eyes were the color of storm clouds, how she smelled like hope. Then she lived still, in that remembering." They sat quiet as the valley filled with evening bird song. Finally, Taklishta stood. "We should move. There's a cave at the far end where we can shelter. Tomorrow we reach the place where our paths divide." The cave was shallow but dry, with old fire rings suggesting years of use by travelers. As dark fell, they sat at the entrance, watching stars emerge between the valley walls. "What will you do?" Ellen asked. "After tomorrow." "Meet the traders. Guide them past Broderick's men. Get medicine to our camps." He paused. "After that, continue fighting. I suppose. It's all I know now." "That's not true. You know plants, trails, how to read stone and sky. You know gentleness. I've seen it in how you speak of children. You could teach, like your grandmother taught you. Teach how to hide, how to watch your world shrink until there's nowhere left to run." Bitterness crept into his voice. "What wisdom is there in defeat? Survival is its own wisdom. And you're not defeated, you're here, alive, helping your people. That's not nothing." He looked at her in the firelight. "You sound like a teacher." "I am a teacher, even if I have no classroom, no students, no purpose anymore. Purpose finds us when we stop chasing it, like water finding its level." A coyote called in the distance, different from the chorus 2 nights ago. This sounded almost mournful. Seeking. "He's lost his pack," Taklishta observed. "It happens sometimes. They survive alone, but it's not the same. Coyotes are meant to run together. Like people." "Like people." Ellen pulled her knees to her chest, thinking of the empty years stretching ahead. New Mexico, a strange classroom, children who didn't know her grief. Starting over, they called it, as if you could simply draw a line and begin fresh. "I'm frightened," she admitted, not of Crow or Broderick or falling off cliffs, of trying to be normal again when I know I'm changed, of pretending to be whole when I'm all sharp edges inside. Then don't pretend, be the sharp edges. Someone, somewhere, needs exactly that, a teacher who knows that life cuts, who can show them how to bind the wounds and keep walking. You make it sound simple. Simple and easy are enemies. Nothing about living is easy. Simple is just seeing the next step clearly. They prepared for sleep, the fire burning low. As Ellen settled onto the sandy cave floor, Taklishta spoke again. "The trail tomorrow, it's clear, well marked. Follow it until you see 3 white boulders like old bones. Turn east there, toward the sunrise. Half a day's walk brings you to Agua Nueva. The people there are kind to strangers. And if Crow finds the trail, then you run, hide, survive." He paused. "Or you could come with me. The camps always need teachers, children who hunger for words like others hunger for bread." Ellen's heart jumped. To stay, to have purpose again, to belong somewhere. "Your people would never accept me. My people accept those who prove themselves worthy of acceptance. You've climbed the Needle's Eye, survived the flood, treated an Apache warrior with kindness instead of fear, a ghost of a smile. Also, you're stubborn as a mule. We appreciate that quality. I don't speak your language. You speak the language that matters: patience with children, respect for learning. The rest is just sounds. You'd learn." Ellen lay in the dark, mind racing. It was impossible. Of course, a white widow living among Apaches. The scandal would echo all the way back to Ohio. Her sister would die of shame. Proper society would close its doors forever. But when had proper society ever done anything for her but whisper behind fans about her losses? "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Good, thinking is good. Just don't think so long, the moment passes." Sleep came slowly, full of dreams where she stood at a crossroads under a blue moon, paths stretching in all directions, each one leading to a different life, a different Ellen. She woke once to find Taklishta sitting guard at the cave mouth, silhouetted against stars. He was singing, so softly she could barely hear a morning song, she thought, or maybe a prayer. The sound was beautiful and terrible and absolutely alone. Tomorrow they would part. He would go to his people, his war, his memories. She would go. Where? To safety, society. A life bounded by other people's expectations. Or maybe, just maybe, she would choose the harder path, the one that led not to safety but to meaning, not to forgetting but to remembering with purpose. The night wind sang through the valley, and Ellen Ward, teacher, widow, survivor, listened to its questions without yet knowing her answers. The crossroads came at midday, where the hidden valley opened onto a wider trail. 3 white boulders stood like ancient sentinels, exactly as Taklishta had described. To the east lay the path to Agua Nueva, to safety, to a life Ellen could predict. To the north, barely visible through heat shimmer, the trail disappeared into Apache territory. "This is where we part," Taklishta said, though he made no move to leave. Ellen stood between the paths, feeling pulled in both directions. The sensible choice was clear east to the Mexican settlements, then on to New Mexico and her sister's carefully arranged position. But sense had fled when she'd followed an Apache warrior up a cliff face, when she'd shared stories of grief by firelight, when she'd begun to see this harsh land as something more than a place to escape. "That medicinal woman you mentioned," she said suddenly. "The one who might help with supplies. Where would I find her?" Taklishta's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. "Margaret Curley lives in a cabin near Staghorn Wells, 2 days north. But that's the direction you're going." It's dangerous. Broderick's men patrol those trails. More dangerous than climbing the Needle's Eye. Different dangerous. That was just rock and air. This is men with guns and grudges. He studied her face. Why? Ellen took a breath. Because I'm tired of running toward nothing. Because your people need medicine and mine have failed me. Because... She paused, searching for truth. Because for the first time in 8 months, I feel like I have something to offer besides grief. You understand what you're choosing. My people may not welcome you. Your people certainly won't forgive you. My people already whisper that I've lost my mind. At least this way. The whispers will be true. For the first time since she'd met him, Taklishta smiled fully, a transformation that made him look years younger. Then we go north. But first, he knelt, scooping up a handful of red dust from the trail. Among my people, choices must be marked. Give me your hands. Ellen extended her bandaged palms. He sprinkled the dust over them, then his own, pressing their hands together briefly. The dust mixed with pine salve and sweat, creating rust-colored streaks. Now the land knows your choice, he said simply, and so do we. They traveled north as the afternoon heat built, keeping to what shade the canyon walls provided. The trail here was more exposed than their previous routes, and Taklishta's vigilance increased. He stopped frequently to listen, to study the horizon, to read signs Ellen couldn't perceive. Riders passed this morning, he said, examining tracks. 4, maybe 5, moving fast. New Crow, perhaps, or others like him. Broderick pays well for Apache scalps. Ellen's stomach turned. Scalps still. The government stopped paying bounties, but men like Broderick find ways. Proof of hostile kills. They call it $50 for a warrior, $25 for a woman, $10 for a... He stopped. It doesn't matter. We keep moving. They climbed out of the canyon system as shadows lengthened, emerging onto a plateau dotted with pinon and juniper. In the distance, Ellen could see smoke rising from what might have been a chimney. Margaret's place. Taklishta confirmed. She tends the wells, trades with everyone, Apache, Mexican, Anglo. Some say she's crazy. Others say she's the only sane person left in the territory. Which do you say? I say she makes good medicine and asks fair trades. The rest doesn't matter. They approached the cabin cautiously. It was a sturdy structure of logs and adobe, with a garden plot showing green despite the arid surroundings. A figure emerged, a woman perhaps 50 years old, hair gone gray but pulled back severely, wearing men's trousers and a leather vest over a faded blue shirt. Well, she called in an Irish accent softened by years in the desert. Taklishta brings me a visitor, and a white woman at that, wearing Apache gifts. Her sharp eyes took in Ellen's borrowed shirt, the red dust on her hands. You'd be the teacher who leaves books for the children. Ellen blinked. How did you... Child, there's little happens in this territory I don't hear about eventually. Come in, both of you. Sun's getting low, and the hunters are getting bold. The cabin's interior was organized chaos herbs hanging from every rafter, jars and bottles lining shelves, books stacked in corners. It smelled of sage and something medicinal, sharp but not unpleasant. Sit, Margaret commanded, already pulling down various containers. You'll need feeding, and those hands need proper tending. Pine pitch is well enough for the trail, but I've got better. As she worked, she talked a constant stream of observations, questions, and commentary. Ellen learned that Margaret had been an army nurse, had come west with a husband who'd died of snakebite, had stayed because the desert gets in your blood like fever, and there's no cure but death. Now then, Margaret said, unwrapping Ellen's hands and examining the cuts. These'll heal clean, but you'll have scars. Marks of choosing, I'd say, from the look of that red dust. You know the ceremony. Girl, I know every ceremony from here to the Colorado River. Have to, in my line of work. Can't heal bodies if you don't understand souls. She applied a green salve that smelled of mint and something else. You planning to stay with the Apache, or just passing through? Ellen glanced at Teclista, who was examining Margaret's medical supplies. I honestly don't know. Honest not knowing. That's rarer than gold out here. Margaret re-bandaged Ellen's hands with clean cloth. Most folks are so certain they're right. They can't see the cliff they're walking toward. Speaking of cliffs, Teclista interjected. We need medicine. The usual willow bark, that tonic for lung fever, and whatever you have for infected wounds. The children are sick again. Some, and we have wounded from the cavalry raid last month. Margaret's face darkened. Heard about that. Peaceful camp. Wasn't it families trying to farm? The government wants us all at San Carlos. When we refuse, he shrugged. San Carlos is a death camp, Margaret said bluntly. Hot as hell, no water worth drinking, nothing to hunt. Might as well shoot people outright as send them there. She began assembling supplies, moving with practiced efficiency. Ellen watched, fascinated by the array of medicines, some clearly pharmaceutical, others traditional herbs, all treated with equal respect. You can help, Margaret told her. Those small jars on the third shelf, fetch them down. Ellen obeyed, reading labels as she worked laudanum, quinine, carbolic acid, followed by snake root, devil's claw, yerba mansa. 2 medicines, Margaret explained. The one that comes from books and cities, the one that comes from land and ancestors. Smart healers use both. A sound outside made them all freeze horses. Approaching fast, Margaret moved to the window, peered out cautiously. Trouble, she said quietly. 5 riders, that tracker Crow and some others. Teclista was already moving, checking his weapons. Back door. Root cellar's better. Under that rug. He pulled back a woven rug to reveal a trapdoor. Ellen, down now. What about now? The command in his voice brooked no argument. Ellen climbed down into darkness that smelled of earth and stored vegetables. Teclista followed, pulling the door closed just as boots stomped onto the porch. They crouched in the dark, hearing Margaret's footsteps overhead, then the door opening. Gentlemen, Margaret's voice came clearly through the floor. To what do I owe the pleasure? Looking for someone. Crow's distinctive drawl, Apache buck and a white woman. Seen them. I see lots of people. Nature of running a well station. This would be recent. Today. Maybe yesterday. Woman's got light hair, wearing a blue dress. Man's tall for an Apache, got a shoulder wound. Shoulder wound. You say your handiwork. Does it matter? Matters if you expect me to patch up your victims after you're done playing hunter. There was movement above, boots on boards. Ellen held her breath. Careful, woman, another voice warned. Mister, Broderick don't like folks who harbor fugitives. And I don't like folks who threaten me in my own home. Margaret shot back. You want water, it's 2 bits a barrel. You want information, try the sheriff. You want trouble, I've got a scattergun, says you should look elsewhere. Tense silence. Then Crow again. We'll water the horses, then we're checking your outbuildings. Got no problem with you, Mrs. Curley, but if you're hiding them, check away. Mind the rattlesnakes in the barn, they're grumpy this time of day. Footsteps moved away from directly overhead. In the darkness, Ellen felt Teclista's hand find hers. Squeeze once in reassurance. They waited, breathing shallowly, as the searchers moved around outside. An eternity later, Margaret's voice came again. They're gone, headed east toward Dutchman's Flat. You can come up. They emerged to find her loading a shotgun with practiced ease. They'll be back. Crow's too smart to give up that easy. You need to move tonight. The medicine, already packed. She indicated 2 canvas bags on the table, along with some food and ammunition. Consider it an investment in keeping the territory interesting. As they prepared to leave, Margaret pulled Ellen aside. "You sure about this path, girl? It's not too late to head for Mexico. Make your way to California. Start fresh where nobody knows your name." "I've tried starting fresh. It doesn't work when you're running from yourself." Margaret nodded slowly. "Aye, there's truth in that. Well then, some advice. Forget what you think you know about Apaches from newspapers and dime novels. They're people complicated, contradictory, capable of great kindness and terrible violence, just like us." "I'm beginning to understand that. Beginning's good. Just remember, understanding's a journey, not a destination." She handed Ellen a small leather pouch. "Herbs for woman troubles. You'll need them living rough." They left as full darkness fell, taking a different trail than they'd arrived on. The moon was rising, not full yet, but bright enough to cast shadows. They moved quickly but carefully, Teclista leading them through a maze of arroyos and ridgelines. "Margaret's a good woman," Ellen said during a brief rest. "One of the few, she sees people, not sights." He adjusted the medicine bags. "Though she's right about Crow, he'll figure out we were there." "What then?" "Then we run faster, fight if we must, survive however we can." They were crossing a dry wash when they herded horses, moving fast, coming from multiple directions. Teclista grabbed Ellen's arm, pulled her behind a cluster of boulders. They split up, he whispered, circled back, smart. The riders appeared on the ridgeline, silhouetted against stars. Ellen counted 6, maybe 7. They were spreading out, clearly following a plan. "Can we evade them?" "Not in the open, not with the moon this bright." He was thinking rapidly, calculating. "There's a place, Ghost Canyon. The Mexicans call it Canyon of Bones. Bad reputation keeps most people out." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind based on truth. It's where my people made a stand 40 years ago. The army killed everyone warriors, women, children. Some say their spirits still guard it." "Do you believe that?" "I believe the dead deserve respect, and I believe live men fear ghosts more than bullets sometimes." He checked his rifle. "Can you run?" "Yes." "Then we run. Stay with me, no matter what." They burst from cover, sprinting across the wash. Shouts erupted behind them. They'd been spotted. Ellen ran as she'd never run before, her ruined boots slipping on loose stone, her breath burning in her throat. A rifle cracked. The bullet whined off a rock near Ellen's head, throwing chips that stung her cheek. More shots followed, but hitting moving targets in moonlight was difficult. "This way," Teclista shouted, veering toward a narrow cleft in the rocks. They plunged into darkness so complete the moon might never have existed. The canyon walls pressed close, the air thick with something Ellen couldn't name: age, perhaps, or sorrow. Behind them, the pursuit slowed. She could hear voices arguing. "I ain't going in there at night." "It's just a canyon." "It's a boneyard. My cousin went in there hunting strays. Came out speaking gibberish. Never been right since." Crow's voice cut through superstitious fools. "It's rock and sand, nothing more." "Then you go first." They moved deeper into the canyon, feeling their way along walls worn smooth by ancient floods. Ellen's hand brushed something that felt unnervingly like carved bone, but she didn't look closer. "Here," Teclista whispered, guiding her into a side passage. They crouched in the darkness, listening. One set of footsteps was approaching, cautious but determined. Crow, Ellen thought, proving his reputation. The tracker passed their hiding spot, moving deeper into the canyon. Teclista waited until the sound faded, then led Ellen up a treacherous climb to a ledge above the main passage. "Now we wait," he breathed. "Let fear do our fighting." From their perch, they could see moonlight filtering into the canyon's main channel. Crow reappeared, moving back toward the entrance, but something in his posture had changed. He kept glancing over his shoulder, weapon raised. Then came a sound that raised the hair on Ellen's neck, whined through the rocks, but pitched like a human moan. Crow spun, fired at shadows. The shot echoed endlessly, multiplying until it sounded like an army firing. The tracker broke into a run, dignity forgotten. He burst from the canyon shouting, "Mount up! They're not in there! Nothing human's in there!" Ellen heard horses wheeling, hoofbeats fading into distance. Only when silence had held for long minutes did Taklishta speak. "The wind knows when to sing," he said. "My grandmother said the dead appreciate when the living remember their suffering." They climbed down, made their way through the canyon more slowly now. Ellen began to see why it had its reputation. Bones gleamed white in scattered moonbeams, some clearly human. Scraps of cloth, pieces of pottery, all the debris of lives violently ended. "Children too?" she asked softly. "Children too. The army claimed they were all warriors, but bones don't lie." They emerged from the far end of the canyon as the moon touched the western peaks. Ahead lay rougher country still, but also, Taklishta promised, the hidden trails that would take them to his people. "You did well," he said as they walked. "No panic, no hesitation." I was terrified. So was I. Fear's not the enemy, letting it control you is. They traveled until dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold. Finally, Taklishta led them to a concealed spring where they could rest and refill their water. Ellen sat on a flat stone, watching the sunrise paint the rocks in shades of fire. Her dress was more rags than cloth now. Her hands ached despite Margaret's ministrations, and she was farther from civilization than she'd ever been. She'd never felt more alive. "No regrets?" Taklishta asked, reading her mood. "Ask me when we reach your people, when I see if I can actually help, or if I'm just another burden they don't need." "You're not a burden. You're a bridge." He was quiet a moment. "My people have a saying, the bridge belongs to neither bank but serves both. Maybe that's what you're meant to be. A bridge between worlds. A teacher who understands both, that's rarer than you know." Ellen thought about that as the desert woke around them, birds calling, lizards scurrying, the eternal cycle of survival continuing. A bridge. Neither fully one thing nor the other, but something necessary. Her hands still bore the red dust of choice. Looking at them in the morning light, she no longer saw stains to be washed away, but marks of becoming. Whatever lay ahead, acceptance or rejection, purpose or more wandering, she would meet it as herself. Not the grieving widow, not the proper teacher, but Ellen Ward, bridge between worlds, marked by the land itself. The sun climbed higher, and they prepared to continue their journey into the unknown. The storm came without warning on their 5th day together, rolling in from the northwest with clouds like bruised flesh. They'd been following a narrow trail through Pima Canyon when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. "Cave," Taklishta said urgently, pointing to a shadow in the cliff face. "Now!" They barely made it inside before the sky opened. Not the gentle rain that blessed the desert in spring, but a violent downpour that turned the trail they'd been walking into a rushing torrent within minutes. Ellen stood at the cave mouth, watching nature's fury with awe. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the canyon in stark, photographic moments. Thunder followed so closely it seemed to come from inside the earth itself. "Move back," Taklishta warned. "Lightning seeks the high places." They retreated deeper into the cave, which opened into a larger chamber. Evidence of previous occupants lay scattered fire-blackened stones, a few pottery shards, marks on the walls that might have been art or maps or both. Taklishta built a small fire using wood someone had stockpiled against such need. As warmth filled the space, Ellen became aware of how cold she was, how her torn dress did little to protect against the storm's chill. She was shivering when he noticed the bruises. "Your arms," he said quietly. Ellen looked down. Purple-black marks covered her forearms where Crow's men had grabbed her during their flight 2 nights ago, when they'd nearly been caught at a river crossing. She'd been so focused on running, on surviving, she'd barely registered the pain. "It's nothing," she said, but her teeth were chattering. Teclista pulled a blanket from his pack wool, traded from the Navajo. He held it out to her. "You need to get warm. That wet dress." Ellen understood what he wasn't saying. The proprieties that had governed her life seemed absurd here, with lightning making the world electric and cold seeping into her bones. She took the blanket, turned away, and struggled out of the ruined dress. The blanket was rough but warm. She wrapped it around herself, trying to cover the bruises that marked not just her arms but her ribs, her shoulders, all the places where violence had touched her in their flight. When she turned back, Teclista was studiously tending the fire, but she caught something in his expression, not desire, but a deeper anger at those who'd marked her. "I must look terrible," she said, attempting lightness. "You look like a warrior," he corrected, "like someone who chose the hard path and paid the price." They sat by the fire as the storm raged outside. Ellen found herself acutely aware of her state, wrapped only in a blanket. Her defenses stripped away with her clothing. The bruises throbbed, and she couldn't stop shaking. "Here." Teclista moved closer, careful not to touch. "Body heat helps. My grandmother taught us in the cold. Pride kills faster than bullets." Ellen shifted nearer until she could feel his warmth without contact. Slowly, her shivering eased. They sat in silence, listening to the storm, the fire, their own breathing. "Can I tell you something?" Ellen said finally. "Yes." "After James died? After the baby?" She pulled the blanket tighter. "I felt like my body betrayed me. It lived when they died. It kept breathing, kept needing food and water and sleep. I hated it for that. And now I see these bruises, feel these cuts, and I think at least it's honest damage. At least it comes from choosing something, not just enduring." Lightning flashed particularly close, the thunder immediate and deafening. Ellen instinctively pressed closer to Teclista. He didn't move away. "Your shoulder," she said, noticing fresh blood on his shirt. "The wound's opened again. The climbing yesterday. It will heal." "Not like that. Let me see." He hesitated, then pulled off his shirt. The wound was worse than before, inflamed, seeping. The constant movement, the lack of proper rest, had prevented healing. Ellen retrieved Margaret's medical supplies from the pack. As she worked cleaning, applying salve, re-bandaging, she was aware of his scars. So many stories written in damaged flesh. Do they hurt the old ones? When the weather changes, when memory is sharp. He was quiet as she worked. Each one is a teacher. This one, he indicated a long scar across his ribs, taught me to watch for Apache scouts who'd taken Army gold. This, touching his shoulder blade, taught that even family can betray for whiskey. And this, Ellen's fingers brushed the new wound before she could stop herself. This teaches me that saving stubborn white women from rivers has consequences. She smiled despite everything. Good consequences or bad? Ask me when we reach my people. The storm was beginning to ease, but darkness had fallen. They would spend the night here, in this cave that held ancient memories and present fears. Ellen suddenly became aware of their position, him shirtless, her in only a blanket, sitting close enough that their breathing synchronized. The awareness made her pull back, but the movement caused the blanket to slip, revealing the worst of the bruising along her shoulder. Teclista's face darkened. "These men, if I see them again..." "They're not important," Ellen said. "What matters is we escaped." "What matters is they thought they had the right to put hands on you, to hunt us like animals, to..." He stopped, jaw clenched. "To what?" "You heard what they said, about entertainment, about what they do to women they catch alone." His voice was flat, controlled. "My sister was caught alone once. What they did..." She survived, but she was never the same. Started cutting her hair short, dressing like a man, said if they saw her as human, maybe they wouldn't. He trailed off. Ellen felt the weight of all the unspoken stories, all the violence that ran beneath the surface of this beautiful, terrible land. "I'm sorry," she said. She's strong now. Teaches the young girls to shoot, to run, to hide. Says knowing how to kill is women's medicine in this world. He looked at Ellen directly. "Could you kill if you had to?" Ellen thought of James's revolver, heavy against her ribs, of the moment at the river when she'd aimed at the tracker, her hand steady even as her heart raced. "Yes," she said simply. "To protect myself. To protect—" She paused, surprised by what she'd almost said. "To protect you." The fire crackled between them, outside. The storm had gentled to steady rain, the kind that would green the desert for weeks to come. "You're still shaking," Taklishta observed. It was true. Despite the fire, despite the blanket. A chill had settled into her bones that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with accumulated fear, exhaustion, the weight of choices made. "Come here," he said softly. "This is not, I mean no disrespect, but you need warmth." Ellen looked at him, this man who'd saved her life, who'd chosen to help her when he had every reason not to, who'd shared his grief and his people's pain with honest words. She moved into the circle of his arms. The warmth was immediate, overwhelming. Not just physical, but something deeper, the comfort of human connection after so long alone. She let her head rest against his chest, heard his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Better?" he asked. "Yes." They sat like that as the fire burned lower, as the rain sang against stone. Ellen felt the boundaries she'd maintained so carefully beginning to dissolve. The proper widow, the respectable teacher, those identities seemed like costumes she'd worn in another life. "No one has seen my body?" she whispered suddenly, surprising herself. "Not since James died. Not the real body scarred, imperfect, marked by loss. I've hidden it under proper dress, proper behavior, proper grief." She felt him go very still. Then, so quietly, she almost missed it. "Let me be first." The words hung between them, carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. Not a request for intimacy, but for truth, for the chance to see and be seen without the masks society demanded. Ellen pulled back to look at his face. What she saw there, desire, yes, but also recognition, understanding. A matching vulnerability made her decision. She let the blanket fall to her waist. In the firelight, her skin was painted gold in shadow. The bruises stood out dark, but also the other marks, the stretch marks from her pregnancy. The scar where the doctor had cut to try to save the baby. The places where grief had worn her thin. Taklishta's breath caught. His hand rose, hovered near but not touching. "You are beautiful," he said. "Not despite these marks. Because of them, they show you lived. You loved, you lost, and you kept going." Tears ran down Ellen's face, not grief this time, but release. To be seen, truly seen, and not found wanting. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. His fingers traced the air above her scars, never quite touching, as if reading a map of survival. When he reached the bruises from their flight, his jaw tightened again. "These will fade," he said. "They're just marks, like yours." "No, mine were earned in battle, chosen risk. These were put on you by men who saw you as less than human. That's different." Ellen caught his hand, pressed it against an unmarked place over her heart. "Then help me make new marks, ones that mean something I choose." The kiss that followed was inevitable, as sunrise gentle at first, then deeper as months of loneliness met and merged. Ellen felt herself coming back to life, nerves sparking that she'd thought dead forever. When they parted, both breathing hard, Taklishta pulled back. "Are you certain you've been through so much? I don't want—" "What I've been through is why I'm certain." Ellen interrupted. "I've spent months feeling like a ghost. You make me remember I have a body, that it's good for more than just carrying grief." What followed was careful, respectful, a dialogue of touch and response rather than conquest. They came together like travelers meeting at a crossroads. sharing warmth against the cold, stories against the silence. Ellen felt no shame, no shadow of the proper widow she'd been, only connection, only the blessed return of feeling. Later, wrapped together in the blanket as the fire died to embers, Ellen traced the scar over Taklishta's heart. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me, not the teacher, not the widow, not the white woman making a strange choice. Just me." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's all I've seen since I pulled you from the river. You, fighting to live even when you thought you wanted to die." They slept entwined as the storm passed over, leaving the world washed and ready for whatever dawn would bring. Ellen woke to sunlight streaming through the cave mouth. The blanket had slipped, but she felt no urge to cover herself. This body that had betrayed her with its stubborn survival had become hers again, marked, scarred, but hers. Taklishta was already awake, watching the light play across the cave walls. When he saw her stirring, he smiled a private, tender expression she knew few had seen. "The storm passed," he said. "Yes." They dressed slowly, returning to the armor of clothing but carrying the memory of its absence. Ellen put on her ruined dress without shame. It would serve until they reached his people, where perhaps she could trade for something better. As they prepared to leave the cave, Taklishta stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Last night was what we both needed," Ellen finished. "No promises, no expectations, just two people choosing to be alive together." He nodded, understanding. "My people are a day's journey from here. Are you ready?" Ellen looked out at the rain-washed world, brilliant under desert sun. Somewhere out there, Broderick's men still hunted. The Apache camps might reject her. She might fail at this bridge building, might find herself truly belonging nowhere. But this morning, marked by choice and connection, she felt ready for whatever came next. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They left the cave as the sun climbed higher, walking together into the uncertain future, carrying the gift of having been truly seen. The Prescott Roadhouse sat like a sun-bleached bone in the middle of nowhere, a sprawling collection of adobe walls and wooden additions that served as hotel, saloon, trading post, and, today, courthouse. Ellen stood in the dusty yard, watching men transform a freight wagon bed into a judge's bench by throwing a horse blanket over the splinters. "Frontier justice," Taklishta murmured beside her, "swift and crooked as a rattler's track." It had been 3 weeks since they'd reached his people. 3 weeks of small victories and careful diplomacy that had led to this moment. Ellen touched the leather portfolio under her arm, Broderick's ledger, recovered from the abandoned ranch, filled with damning evidence of water theft, forged deeds, and violence disguised as law. "There," she said, nodding toward a group of riders approaching. "The judge." Judge Artemis Pike looked exactly like what he was, a political appointee who rode circuit because no one else would take the job. Thin, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much and cared about too little. He dismounted stiffly and immediately called for whiskey. "And Broderick," Taklishta observed. Silas Broderick arrived like a lord visiting his holdings, in a black carriage incongruous with the rough surroundings. He stepped down, immaculate in a gray suit, every inch the successful businessman. Only his eyes cold as winter stone revealed the predator beneath. Ellen felt Taklishta tense beside her as Crow Malloy and 4 other gunmen flanked Broderick. She touched his arm lightly, a reminder. "We do this with law, not bullets." "Mrs. Ward." Broderick's voice carried across the yard, silky with false courtesy. "What an unexpected pleasure. I'd heard you'd gone native, but seeing it..." He let his gaze travel over her appearance, the Apache dress she now wore, her sun-darkened skin, the turquoise bracelet Taklishta's sister had given her. Such a waste of good breeding. "Mr. Broderick," Ellen replied evenly. "I see you've brought your usual honor guard. Afraid of something." His smile tightened. Cautious. Merely, there are savages about, after all. The crowd was gathering ranchers, townspeople, drifters, all drawn by the spectacle of a trial. Ellen spotted their witnesses Manuel Vega, the old vaquero who'd lost his family's ranch to Broderick's manipulations, Sarah Morrison, the widow whose husband had died defending their well, and Walking Crow, the Apache boy Ellen had taught to read, now brave enough to speak truth to power. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Pike," someone shouted, and the makeshift court came to order. Pike climbed onto the wagon bed, already unsteady from drink. "This court is now in session. What's the complaint?" Ellen stepped forward. "Theft, Your Honor, fraud, murder, all in service of stealing water rights from lawful owners." "That's a heavy charge," Pike said, eyeing her with surprise. "And you are?" Ellen Ward, speaking for the combined interests of the Apache bands, Mexican landholders, and American settlers whose water rights have been systematically stolen by Mr. Broderick. A murmur ran through the crowd. Pike's eyebrows rose. "A white woman speaking for Apaches, that's irregular." "What's irregular?" Ellen said. "Is men dying of thirst while one man hoards water he has no right to? May I present evidence?" Broderick stood. "Your Honor, I object to this woman having any standing in this court. She's obviously been corrupted by her associations." He said the last word like it tasted foul. "For all we know, she's being coerced by her savage companions." "No one coerces me, Mr. Broderick," Ellen said coldly. "I speak freely, as is my right as an American citizen." "Rights you forfeited when you chose to bed down with." "Enough," Pike interrupted. "The witness may present evidence, but mind yourself, woman. This court has little patience for dramatics." Ellen opened the ledger. "This book, recovered from the Delgado Ranch after its mysterious abandonment, contains Mr. Broderick's private records. I draw your attention to the entry dated March 15th, a payment of $50 to one Jake Morrison for, quote, removing obstacle at Sweetwater Springs. Jake Morrison was later seen drinking in Tucson, boasting about the rancher he'd shot for refusing to sell water rights. Hearsay. Broderick's lawyer, imported from San Francisco, objected. The book could belong to anyone. Then perhaps Mr. Broderick can explain why his signature appears on every page." Ellen held up the ledger, showing the distinctive scrawl. The crowd stirred. Broderick's face remained calm, but Ellen saw his hand move toward his vest pocket, a tell Taklishta had taught her to watch for. "I call Manuel Vega to speak," Ellen announced. The old vaquero stepped forward, hat in hand, in broken English supplemented by Spanish. He told of 3 generations on his ranch, of Broderick's men damming the creek upstream, of crops dying and cattle dropping, of the night riders who burned his barn when he refused to sell. "They gave me paper," Manuel said, producing a crumpled document. "Said sign or watch my grandchildren starve, so I signed." A legal transaction. Broderick's lawyer insisted, signed and witnessed. Witnessed by Mr. Broderick's own men. Ellen countered. She turned to the crowd. "How many of you have signed such papers? How many watched your land die before selling for pennies on the dollar?" Hands rose throughout the crowd. Mexican, Apache, even some whites. Pike was starting to look uncomfortable. "Order," he called. "This isn't a town meeting." Sarah Morrison testified next, her voice steady as she described her husband's death. Then came Walking Crow, speaking in careful English about the sacred springs his people had used for generations, now fenced and guarded by Broderick's men. The boy's testimony is inadmissible. Broderick's lawyer objected. "Indians can't testify against white men in territorial court." "He's not testifying against Mr. Broderick," Ellen said smoothly. "He's merely describing the location of water sources, unless Mr. Broderick claims to own the very concept of water." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Broderick's face darkened, Your Honor, he said, standing. This is becoming a circus. I'm a businessman, not a criminal. I've brought prosperity to this territory, jobs for those willing to work, progress. Progress built on stolen water is just dressed-up theft, Ellen interrupted. Your Honor, I have one more piece of evidence. She produced a letter, careful to keep her hands steady. This was the gambit, the risk everything hinged on. A communication from Mr. de Broderick to certain parties in Washington, discussing the, quote, removal of Apache obstacles to territorial development, and promising that the savage problem will be resolved before the railroad arrives. The crowd went silent, even in a territory hardened to violence. The implications were clear. Broderick wasn't just stealing water. He was orchestrating removal, maybe massacre. Where did you get that? Broderick snarled, his composure finally cracking. From your own files, Mr. Broderick. Amazing what men leave lying around abandoned ranches. That's when Crow Malloy made his move. The gunman's hand was halfway to his pistol when the shot rang out. Not from Crow, from the edge of the crowd, where Teclista stood with his rifle already returning to rest position. Crow's gun spun away into the dust, the man clutching his bleeding hand. Nobody else moves. Teclista said calmly, "This is a court of law." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Broderick's men fingered their weapons. The crowd pressed back, and Ellen stood exposed in the middle, wondering if their gamble on justice had just signed their death warrants. Then Judge Pike surprised everyone. Mr. Malloy, he said, voice suddenly stone-sober, you just drew a weapon in my court. That's contempt at best, attempted murder at worst. He looked at Broderick. Control your men, sir, or I'll have the federal marshals control them for you. Federal marshals? Broderick scoffed. The nearest marshal is 200 miles away. Pike smiled thinly and gestured to the crowd. 3 men stepped forward, badges glinting. Actually, they've been here for a week. Something about reports of water rights violations affecting interstate commerce. Seems the government takes a dim view of men creating private empires. Ellen felt her knees go weak with relief. The letters she'd sent through Margaret Curley, the careful documentation, the plea for intervention, it had worked. This is entrapment, Broderick hissed. This is justice, Pike corrected. Late and imperfect, but justice nonetheless. He turned to the crowd. This court rules that all water deeds obtained through coercion, fraud, or violence are null and void. Water rights revert to original holders or, in cases of traditional use, to the communities that have depended on them. The crowd erupted. Mexicans embraced Apaches. Ranchers shook hands with former enemies. And Ellen found herself at the center of a swirl of gratitude and celebration. But Broderick wasn't finished. You think this ends it? He said, his voice carrying over the noise. You think one ruling from a drunk judge changes anything? I have money, influence, friends in Washington. I'll be back. And when I am. When you are. One of the federal marshals interrupted. You'll be facing charges in federal court. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and violation of treaty rights. That letter misses. Ward mentioned we have the rest of the correspondence. You're done here, Broderick. As the marshals moved in, Crow made one last desperate play. His good hand went for a hideout gun. The movement almost too fast to follow. 3 shots rang out simultaneously from Teclista, from a marshal, and from Sarah Morrison, who'd pulled her late husband's navy coat from beneath her shawl. Crow fell, his chest blooming red. He looked surprised more than anything, as if he couldn't believe his luck had finally run out. Anyone else? The marshal asked mildly. Broderick's remaining men raised their hands in surrender. Broderick himself stood frozen, watching his empire crumble in real time. You, he said, focusing on Ellen with pure hatred. You did this. A proper white woman, turning against her own kind for savages and greasers. I turned against thieves and murderers, Ellen corrected. Race had nothing to do with it, though if it had, I'd still choose the people who took me in over those who cast me out. The marshals led Broderick away in irons. The crowd began to disperse, but not before many stopped to thank Ellen, to touch her hand, to call her maestra and friend. As the sun began to set, Ellen and Taklishta stood alone in the dusty yard. The wagon that had served as a courthouse was already being loaded with freight. "It worked," Ellen said, hardly believing it. "The law worked," Taklishta corrected. This time. But Broderick was right about one thing, he has friends. Influence. This isn't over. No, Ellen agreed. But it's a start. The water flows free tonight. Communities that were dying will live. Children who were thirsty will drink. He took her hand, traced the fading red dust that still marked her palm. "You did this," the teacher who thought she had nothing left to give. "We did this, all of us together." She looked up at him. "What now?" "Now we return to my people. Continue teaching. Prepare for the next fight." He paused. "If you're staying." Ellen looked around the rough yard where frontier justice had, for once, lived up to its name. Thought of the children waiting for their lessons, the communities rebuilding around shared water, the work still to be done. "I'm staying," she said. "This is home now." As they mounted their horses and rode toward the setting sun, Ellen felt the weight of what they'd accomplished and what lay ahead. Justice was never permanent in the territory, always requiring defense, always under threat. But today, they'd won. Today, water flowed free and communities breathed easier. Today, a teacher and a warrior had proven that justice could prevail, even on the frontier, even against men who believed themselves untouchable. The road ahead was long, but they would ride it together. The word spread like wildfire through the valleys and canyons. Broderick was coming back, not with lawyers this time, but with hired guns from Texas, promising to take by force what the court had denied him. Ellen stood on the flat-topped mesa overlooking Staghorn Wells, watching dust plumes in the distance that meant riders, many riders, approaching fast. "How many?" asked Sarah Morrison, her late husband's rifle steady in her hands. 30, maybe 40. Taklishta replied from his vantage point. "More than we expected." The wells below looked peaceful in the evening light, 3 natural springs that had sustained life in this desert for countless generations. Now they were about to become a battleground. Ellen turned to survey their defenders, Apache warriors, Mexican vaqueros, white ranchers, Chinese miners who'd lost claims to Broderick's manipulations, even young Pastor Collins, who declared that theft of water was theft from God. They numbered 23 fighters, plus a dozen others managing supplies and tending children safely hidden in the canyon caves. "It's not enough," muttered Thomas Chen, the eldest of the Chinese miners. "It's what we have," Ellen said firmly. She'd learned that doubt spread faster than confidence in situations like this. "And we have advantages Broderick doesn't. We know this land. We fight for our homes. And we stand together." As darkness fell, their small coalition gathered around the main spring. Ellen had spent the afternoon writing recording names, stories, the reasons each person stood ready to risk everything for water. If things went badly, she wanted a record to survive. "My grandfather's grandfather drank from these springs," Walking Crow said in his improving English. He was 16 now, no longer the boy she'd first taught, but not yet the man he was trying to be. "The stones remember our prayers. They will not let strangers take them." Manuel Vega crossed himself. "With respect, young one, I think we need more than memory and prayers tonight." "Then it's good we have rifles too," Taklishta said dryly, causing nervous laughter. Ellen stood, commanding attention. "Tomorrow at dawn, Broderick expects to find us scattered, afraid, easy to intimidate. Instead, he'll find something else, a community that refuses to be divided. Apache and Mexican, white and Chinese, all standing for the same thing, the right to live, to water our children and crops, to exist without bowing to rich men's greed." Pretty words, said John Hoffman, a rancher who'd lost 2 sons to Broderick's previous violence. But bullets don't care about unity. No, Ellen agreed. But unity determines where bullets fly. Broderick's men fight for pay. We fight for survival. That difference matters. They spent the night in preparation. The Apache warriors taught the others to move silently across sand, to use the mesa's broken terrain for cover. The vaqueros showed how to spook horses with reflected moonlight on metal. The Chinese miners revealed techniques for creating confusion with black powder charges not to kill, but to disorient. Ellen found herself checking and rechecking James's old Colt, now worn smooth from her constant handling. In the months since the flood, she'd learned to shoot with deadly accuracy, though she'd only fired at targets. Tonight might change that. "You're thinking too hard," Taklishta said, appearing beside her as he often did, silent as shadow. "I'm thinking about killing," she admitted. "Whether it changes who we are. Killing changes everyone. But sometimes not killing changes us worse, makes us complicit in our own destruction." He checked his own rifle with practiced ease. "I've killed men. Each one took something from me. But letting my family die without fighting would have taken everything." Near midnight, their scouts reported Broderick's force had camped 5 miles out, confident in their numbers. The deputy marshal who'd arrested Broderick after the trial was with them. Apparently his dedication to law was negotiable for the right price. "So much for federal justice," Sarah Morrison spat. "Justice was never coming from outside," Pastor Collins said quietly. "It was always going to come from us, or not at all." As the stars wheeled overhead, Ellen moved among the defenders. Here was Ayanna, Taklishta's niece, barely 14 but insisting she could reload rifles as fast as any adult. There was Jose Delgado, whose family had owned the ranch where they'd found Broderick's ledger, his face set with determination to reclaim what was stolen. Each person had a story, a reason to be here beyond mere survival. The wells had become a symbol of resistance, of community, of the possibility that the powerful could be defied. 3 hours before dawn, Taklishta gathered the fighters. "They'll come with the sunrise at their backs, trying to blind us. We'll be positioned here, here, and here." He sketched in the sand. "Remember, we don't need to defeat them. Just make the cost too high. Men who fight for money have a price point where they decide it's not worth it." "And if they don't retreat?" Thomas Chen asked. "Then we hold until we can't." Taklishta's voice was matter-of-fact. "But every minute we hold is another minute for word to spread, for real federal marshals to arrive, for the territory to see that we won't be moved." Ellen felt a hand on her arm. Margaret Curley had arrived in the night with medical supplies and her own shotgun. "Figured you'd need patching up after this foolishness," the older woman said. "Also brought something else." She produced a camera, one of the new portable models. "Evidence," she said simply. "Whatever happens here, the world should see it." As the eastern sky began to lighten, they took their positions. Ellen found herself between Taklishta and Walking Crow, the boy's hands steady on his father's old rifle. Below, the wells reflected the pre-dawn sky like eyes watching heaven. Then they came. Broderick's force appeared with the sunrise, spread in a long line designed to intimidate. The former deputy rode in front, badge still pinned to his coat in mockery of law. But Broderick himself was there too, no longer the distant businessman, but armed and ready to take personally what he believed was his. They stopped just outside rifle range. Broderick rode forward with 2 men, including a new gunman Ellen didn't recognize, younger than Crow had been, with the dead eyes of someone who'd killed too early and too often. "Last chance," Broderick called out. "Disperse now, and some of you might live. Stay, and I'll water these sands with your blood." Ellen stood, making herself a target. The wells belonged to the people, Mr. Broderick. All the people, that was decided by law. "Law," Broderick laughed. "The law is what men with guns say it is, and I have more guns." "You have hired killers," Ellen shot back. "We have defenders. There's a difference. Then let's test that difference. Broderick raised his hand to signal the attack. What happened next would be debated in cantinas and trading posts for years. As Broderick's hand fell, instead of gunfire, there was suddenly water. Dozens of buckets and barrels of precious water poured out onto the sand in a long line between the two forces. "This is what you'd steal," Ellen called out, as their people continued the gesture they'd planned in secret. "This is what you'd kill for. Water that belongs to the earth, to the future, to children not yet born. Look at it soak into sand and ask yourself, is this worth dying for?" The symbolic act had its effect. Some of Broderick's hired guns shifted uneasily, perhaps remembering their own thirsts, their own desperate searches for water in this unforgiving land. But the young killer just smiled and drew his gun. The morning exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides, the mesa providing cover for the defenders while Broderick's men were exposed on open ground. Ellen fired James's Colt, aiming for horses rather than men, trying to unhorse riders without killing. Beside her, Walking Crow proved why Apache boys learned warfare young, his shots precise and deadly. Taklishta was everywhere at once, directing fire, covering retreats, a force of nature defending his chosen ground. The Chinese miners' black powder charges went off, creating walls of smoke and confusion. Horses reared, men shouted, and through it all, the wells continued their eternal flow, indifferent to human violence. Ellen saw Jose Delgado fall, clutching his shoulder. She saw Ayana, despite orders to stay back, dragging him to cover. She saw Pastor Collins praying over his rifle as he fired, tears streaming down his face. Then she saw Broderick himself, pushing through his own men, making for the wells with the deputy and 3 others. They were trying to flank the defenders, to take the springs themselves and force a surrender. "The wells!" Ellen shouted, but her voice was lost in gunfire. Without thinking, she broke cover, running along the mesa's edge to intercept them. A bullet whined past her ear. Another tugged at her skirt. Then she was sliding down the loose scree. James's Colt extended, firing at the men threatening the heart of their community. The deputy turned, raising his rifle. Time slowed. Ellen saw the bore of the gun, impossibly large, pointing at her chest. She tried to dodge, knowing she was too late. The shot came from behind her. The deputy spun and fell, his rifle firing harmlessly into the air. Taklishta slid down beside her, lever-actioning his rifle for another shot. But it was Sarah Morrison who ended Broderick's dream of empire. The widow emerged from behind a boulder near the main spring, her husband's rifle steady in her hands. "For Robert," she said clearly, and fired. Broderick clutched his chest, looking more surprised than pained. He fell to his knees at the water's edge, his blood mixing with the sacred springs. "Pull back," someone among the hired guns shouted. "It ain't worth it." The retreat turned into a rout. Men who'd come for easy money against supposedly helpless farmers found themselves facing determined fighters defending their homes. They fled, leaving dead and wounded behind. As the sun climbed higher, the defenders emerged from cover. The cost was clear, 3 dead on their side, including old Manuel Vega, who'd lived to see his lands water-free but not to taste it again. 7 wounded, some seriously, but they'd held. The wells remained theirs. Ellen knelt by Broderick's body. His eyes were still open, staring at the sky he'd tried to own. "He was so certain," she said softly, "certain that money and violence were all that mattered." "They matter," Taklishta replied, "but other things matter more." He helped her to her feet. "You did well. Crazy, but well." Margaret Curley was already at work, tending wounded with help from anyone who could still stand. Her camera sat nearby, having captured images that would soon spread across the territory, proof of what had happened when ordinary people stood against extraordinary greed. Pastor Collins led a prayer for the dead, all the dead, even Broderick's hired guns. "Violence diminishes us all," he said, but sometimes it's the only language tyrants understand. As the day wore on, unexpected help arrived. Real federal marshals this time, led by a captain who'd received Margaret's telegrams and decided to investigate. Ranchers from neighboring valleys, having heard of the fight, came offering support. Even a delegation from the nearest Apache reservation, officially forbidden to leave but understanding that some laws existed to be broken. By evening, the wells were surrounded not by fighters but by families. Children played in the water while adults shared food and stories. Mexican guitars played alongside Apache drums. Chinese voices joined in Spanish songs. It was, Ellen thought, what America was supposed to be: diverse people united by shared struggle and mutual respect. "What now?" Walking Crow asked her as they watched the sunset paint the mesa red. "Now we build," Ellen said. "Schools, homes, communities. We make this stand mean something beyond just one day's violence." Teclista joined them, his arm in a sling from a graze he'd barely noticed during the fight. Broderick was wrong about the law being what men with guns say. It's what communities agree to live by. Today we wrote new law. "In blood," Ellen said soberly. "Blood and water," he corrected. "The two things this land has always demanded." That night, they held a victory feast by the wells, but it was a subdued celebration, marked by empty places where friends should have sat. Ellen found herself standing apart, looking up at the stars that had witnessed so much human struggle over something as simple as water. Sarah Morrison approached, still carrying her husband's rifle. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing us we could fight back, for making Robert's death mean something." "We all showed each other," Ellen replied. "That's the only way it works." As the fire burned low and people began to drift away, Ellen and Teclista sat by the main spring. The water gurgled peacefully, as if the day's violence had been just another passing storm. "You know there'll be others," he said. "Other Brodericks, other attempts to steal what shouldn't be owned." "I know, but now people know they can stand together. That changes things." "You've changed things," the teacher who thought she had nothing left to give. Ellen smiled, thinking of the school she planned to build here, where children of all backgrounds could learn side by side, where the story of this day would be told not as Apache versus white versus Mexican, but as people versus greed. "We've all changed," she said. "That's what water does in the desert. It transforms everything it touches." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, diamonds scattered across black velvet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal battles over the killings, attempts to divide their coalition, the eternal struggle for resources in a hard land. But tonight, the water flowed free. Tonight, communities that had been separated by suspicion and prejudice had stood together and won. Tonight, Ellen Ward, teacher, widow, warrior for justice, felt she had finally found her purpose in this vast, difficult, beautiful land. The wells sang their ancient song, and the people listened, and the desert bloomed with possibility. The school rose from the desert floor like a promise kept. Adobe walls baked golden in the sun, a real roof instead of canvas, windows that caught morning light and threw it across the packed earth floor where children sat in circles, learning. Ellen stood in the doorway, watching Walking Crow help young Ayanna with her letters while Jose Delgado's son practiced numbers with a Chinese boy whose father had died defending the wells 6 months ago. "Never thought I'd see the day," Margaret Curley said, approaching with her medical bag. She'd taken to visiting weekly, teaching basic health alongside Ellen's lessons. Apache and Mexican and white and Chinese, all under one roof. "It's what water does," Ellen replied. "Brings different streams together." The old woman snorted. "Pretty words, but we both know it's more than that. It's what you and that man of yours built with stubbornness and sweat." Ellen smiled at the phrase, "that man of yours." She and Teclista hadn't married, not in any way the territorial government would recognize, but they'd pledged themselves in the old way and the new, with water from the sacred wells and words spoken under stars. The community had witnessed, and that was law enough for them. Speaking of stubborn men, Margaret continued, there's riders coming, federal types, by the look of them. Ellen's hand went instinctively to where James's Colt used to rest. She'd retired the gun after the battle at the wells, but old habits died hard. These days, her weapons were words and witness, documentation and education. The riders were indeed federal, a marshal named Harrison, with kind eyes and graying temples, accompanied by two younger men who looked uncomfortable in their city suits. Mrs. Ward. Harrison dismounted, removing his hat. I'm sorry to interrupt your teaching, but we need to speak. Ellen stepped outside, noting how the children immediately moved to continue their lessons without her. Self-directed learning her greatest victory. If this is about the violence at the wells. No, ma'am. That's been ruled justified defense. This is about... He paused, choosing words. The government's considering new policies. Relocation efforts. They want to move all Apaches to designated reservations by year's end. Ellen's blood chilled. They'd feared this, prepared for it, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. These people are peaceful. They're farming, ranching, their children are in school. I know. That's why I'm here unofficially. To warn you. To suggest you start documenting everything, every family. Every improvement to the land, every sign of what they're calling civilization. His voice dropped. Between us, I think it's wrong, but I'm just one voice. After the marshal left, Ellen found Taklishta at the wells, teaching a group of boys to read animal signs in the mud. His face was calm when she told him, but she saw the tightness around his eyes. We knew this would come, he said quietly. Knowing and facing are different things. That night, they called a community meeting, the schoolhouse filled with worried faces, Apache families who'd built homes near the water, Mexican ranchers who'd intermarried with them, white settlers who'd found acceptance here they'd never known elsewhere. We don't run, Taklishta said simply. We've run enough. Here we make our stand, with papers and laws if possible, with resistance if necessary. They have armies, someone called out. They have soldiers. We have roots. He gestured to the children playing outside. Every school lesson, every shared meal, every marriage between our peoples makes us harder to uproot. Ellen stood. Tomorrow I start recording everything. Every birth, death, marriage, land improvement. We'll create such a paper trail that removing us would mean destroying evidence of our success. Papers didn't stop them before, Sarah Morrison said bitterly. She'd become harder since the fight at the wells, though she still taught the children hymns on Sundays. No, but visibility might. Margaret has contacts at Eastern newspapers. The camera that recorded our defense can record our daily lives. Let America see what we've built. They dispersed with purpose. Over the following weeks, Ellen became a chronicler of ordinary miracles. She photographed Ayanna teaching younger Apache children their letters. She documented the irrigation channels that turned desert to garden. She recorded marriages like that of Pastor Collins to a Mexican widow, their wedding blessed by Apache singers and Catholic prayers alike. Taklishta, meanwhile, prepared for darker possibilities. He taught the young men and women to disappear into the landscape, to cache supplies in hidden places, to use the canyons as their ancestors had, not for war, but for survival. If they come to move us, he told Ellen one night, some will go peacefully, hoping for mercy. Others will fade into the rocks. Both choices have honor. And us, he touched her face gently. We do what we've always done, stand between worlds and try to build bridges. The letter came on a day when rain blessed the desert, filling the air with a scent of creosote and new life. Ellen opened it with trembling hands, recognizing her sister's writing. Ellen, it read, I've received your letters and photographs. I've shared them with influential friends. You should know that your story, a white woman teaching Apache children, communities united around water, has caused quite a stir. Some call you a traitor to your race, Others see you as what America could be. The Secretary of the Interior himself has asked to see your documentation. There may be hope. Underscore. Hope, such a fragile word in the territory, where promises broke like drought-stressed grass. But Ellen clung to it as she continued her work. One morning, she found Taklishta sitting by the main spring, carving something into a flat piece of sandstone. She watched as symbols took shape, Apache signs mixed with English letters. What does it say? Here, water flows free. Here, people stood together. Here, children learn without losing themselves. In both languages, so future generations can read it however they need to. Planning for a future that might not come. Planning for a future that must come, one way or another. They were interrupted by commotion riders approaching fast. Ellen's heart sank, expecting soldiers. Instead, she saw Margaret Curley leading a group of well-dressed strangers. Journalists, Margaret announced with satisfaction. From Chicago, New York, even San Francisco, come to see the miracle of Staghorn Wells. For 3 days, the visitors documented everything. They interviewed Apache grandmothers and Mexican vaqueros, photographed the school and the gardens, tasted water from springs that had never known ownership. One journalist, a young woman named Catherine Winters, spent hours with Ellen. "They're calling you the desert teacher back east," she said. "The woman who chose Apaches over her own kind." "I chose justice over prejudice," Ellen corrected. "Community over isolation. It wasn't about choosing sides. It was about recognizing we're all on the same side when it comes to survival." Catherine's subsequent articles would be read in parlors and Congress alike. But on her last night, she asked Ellen privately, "Are you happy here truly?" Ellen looked out at the mesa painted purple by sunset, at children of all colors playing by the wells, at Taklishta teaching Walking Crow to chart stars. "I came here to die," she said quietly. "Instead, I learned to live. Yes, I'm happy, frightened for the future, exhausted by the fight, but happy." The government's decision came with the first frost. A compromise, Marshall Harrison called it, though it satisfied no one completely. The communities around Staghorn Wells would be designated a cultural preservation experiment. Families could stay if they demonstrated progression toward civilized standards, which meant the school, the cooperative farming, the careful documentation Ellen had compiled. "We're zoo animals," Taklishta said bitterly when he heard. "Dancing for white approval." "We're alive," Ellen countered. "Free, together. The dancing is worth that." Not everyone agreed. Some Apache families chose the reservations, believing government promises of food and protection. Others disappeared into the mountains, becoming ghosts and legends. But a core remained, building something new from the mixture of old ways and necessary adaptations. Ellen began writing it all down, not just events, but feelings, struggles, small victories, on quiet evenings. She read portions aloud while Taklishta carved and listeners gathered. "I died once, in daylight," she wrote. "When grief stopped my heart but not my breathing, a stranger's hand pulled me from the river, and I thought I was saved. But salvation came slower, in pencils given to children, in water shared without thought of ownership, in learning that bridges between worlds are built one plank at a time, with patience and courage and the stubborn refusal to let fear win." The ceremony came as spring returned to the desert, not planned, but growing organically from community need, at the wells where blood had been spilled, where communities had united. They gathered to formalize what had already become true. Taklishta and Ellen stood in a circle drawn in the sand, water from the sacred springs in a shared cup. Pastor Collins spoke Christian blessings, while Apache singers offered older prayers. Mexican guitars played while Chinese drums kept rhythm. "In my language," Taklishta said, loud enough for all to hear, "marriage is not just between two people, but between families, communities, ways of being. Today we marry not just as man and woman, but as promise keepers, bridge builders, water guardians." Ellen added, We promise to keep this place where children learn without losing themselves, where water flows for all who thirst, where tomorrow is always possible despite yesterday's pain." They drank from the cup, poured the rest onto the sand where it soaked deep, carrying their promises to the earth's heart. That night, as celebration continued around them, Ellen and Taklishta walked to the mesa's edge. The desert spread endlessly under stars, beautiful and terrifying and full of hidden life. "What do you see out there?" he asked. Ellen considered. Once she'd seen only emptiness, death, ending. Now, "I see home, difficult and demanding and worth every struggle. I see tomorrow's challenges and next year's hopes. I see our children's children asking why we fought so hard for water and community. And I see us having answers worth giving." "Our children's children," he repeated softly. "You think we'll last that long? Look what we've survived already. Flash floods and gunfights, bureaucrats and bigots. We're too stubborn to fail now." He laughed, the sound rich in the night air. "The desert teacher has spoken." "The desert teacher has learned," she corrected. "From you, from the land, from the wells that keep flowing regardless of human foolishness." She took his hand, felt the calluses that matched her own. "We're not done learning, not done fighting, but tonight, we're exactly where we need to be." Lightning flickered on the horizon, not threatening but promising. The desert was preparing for rain, for growth, for another cycle of death and rebirth. In the morning, Ellen would return to teaching, to documenting, to building bridges word by word and deed by deed. Taklishta would continue protecting and providing, showing young men that strength meant more than violence. They would face new threats, drought and politics, prejudice and progress's double edge. But tonight, they were simply two people who'd found each other in the vast desert, who'd chosen to stop running and start building. Tonight, the wells sang their eternal song, and everyone who'd fought for them slept peacefully. The map might show Staghorn Wells as a tiny dot in the territory's emptiness, but maps lied. Here was the whole world, every struggle and joy, every loss and discovery, every bridge built between strangers who became family. Here was home. Ellen Ward, who'd begun as a grieving widow seeking death in the desert, stood transformed. Teacher, warrior, bridge builder, wife in all the ways that mattered. The desert had taken everything she'd been and given back everything she could become. Under stars that blessed and ignored in equal measure, she held tight to the present while facing the future, knowing that whatever came, she would meet it standing. The water flowed. The children learned. The community endured. It was enough. It was everything. It was a beginning that would echo through generations. Proof that in the hardest places, love and justice could bloom like desert flowers after rain. Thank you for listening to our story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you driving through the night, relaxing at home? Or perhaps on a long journey? Please share your thoughts and location in the comments below so we can connect and discuss this story together. If you enjoyed this Western romance, please subscribe to Wild West Tales, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover this tale of love, justice, and survival in the American frontier. Your support brings these stories to life and shares them with fellow lovers of Western adventures. Until next time, keep riding toward the sunset and remember, even in the harshest desert, hope can bloom.